Hey everyone, this is Arabella from Arabella's Voice Studio, back on the pod for another episode. Really excited to be joined by Johnny Ray.
Hello.
Hello, I'm really excited that you're joining us here today, Johnny, for a number of reasons. One, because you're here, but two, because we did a episode recently with our vocal distortion teacher, Quinn. And if you're curious about that podcast, I definitely recommend you check that out. That's Mastering Metal Vocals with Quinn. We'll link that episode above. But it was one of our most popular episodes. And, it's one of those things when students say, I want to learn metal, I kind of go, that's like asking to learn classical music. Like, what kind of metal? What do you want to learn? Because you can have everything from like screamo to just light growls and distortion and pop. So I was super excited to have you on today, Johnny, to just give us another perspective on what is metal and how to sing it.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
So I'd love to just start with you telling our listeners who you are and what you do.
I'm Johnny Ray. I am a metal vocalist. I also play guitar and keyboard. I play in a band called The Morning. We've been together for about 8 years, and we've done some pretty cool stuff so far. I'm also a vocal coach. I have a website, stellarvocals.com, and that's one of the things that I do for money, because obviously metal doesn't pay well. um, and I also own a custom jewelry store, and that's where I, uh, you know, bring in the money for my family and so on. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. This is sort of a tangent comment from metal vocals, but I'm in awe that you run two businesses, not just one, because I would say that this is a great passion and a great love of mine, but it is a labor of love sometimes, or a passion project
Hmm.
where it just takes a lot of energy. So I have to say, wow, and good for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, my wife works with me, and my sons are, grown now. They're 19 and 21, so I have plenty of help. I have employees at the jewelry store, so that helps to, run that. And I've learned to let go of a lot of the inner workings of that business, and I just kind of work on the business as opposed to in the business. So that's kind of how I make that work. And then actually, I teach in person and online, and my studio is actually, I built it in the back of the jewelry store, so I can be
Wow.
there all the time, and people come in and I teach them. So it works out nicely.
Just curious, do you ever feel like a clash of worlds when you're there? And like, do you ever hear something going on in the jewelry store or in the
Hmm.
studio and you're like, which way do I turn? Or
Yeah,
do
a
you
lot.
have that separation?
From time to time, my students know that the jewelry store can sometimes, like, I might have to pop out for a second and handle something, but
Mm,
for the most part, it's not a problem.
that's awesome.
Hmm.
That's very cool. I started teaching online during COVID, but I taught out of my college apartment. And I had a screen behind me that I would just carry around the apartment depending on where it was quietest and like where my roommates weren't.
Hmm.
So, they thought I was in one spot, but I would just carry around these screens to different areas. And then one day I was moving to a different state actually, temporarily when I graduated, and I just like had already packed the screen and they saw that I was in um like the kitchen area basically, and they were like, what is this? So it's
You always had a background, so they thought you were always in the same spot.
yep,
Nice.
but I never was. So I can relate to you on that, but let's get into metal.
Sure.
Why metal? And the reason I ask that is, one, what is your interest? But two, sometimes students will say, well, why should I do that with my voice when I can do that in the recording or in post? Or why should I learn that specific skill?
Well, I mean, it's definitely you have to want to, right? You have to, in order to get into something like that, there has to be some like bands or some singers that inspire you, you know. And the singers that inspire me, they do that naturally, They do that when they sing, I'm a big fan of like Symphony X, Russell Allen. He
Hmm.
he's a huge inspiration for me, and he does that naturally with his voice. Why metal? Because metal is like a very passionate music. Um, a lot of people they think angry, but it's not always angry. In fact, that's quite often not the case. Metal is very real. It's very introspective. People get into real topics, and a lot of times, like a lot of bands get into you know really deep topics like spirituality and philosophy and all those sorts of things. And from that standpoint, it's very attractive to me, because I'm a kind of guy that likes to get into the deeper things. But metal has always been for me, as a kid, just the things that I went through as a kid. It always kind of helped me to make it through to the next day. Listening and singing to Korn when I was 14 or 15, Deftones, like I needed that outlet, and you know, it's funny because I was a big fan of Pantera when I was a kid, and that is an angry band. Just straight up, that's an angry band.
Different levels on the spectrum, right?
Different levels. And actually, I got to see them last year. Now, obviously, it isn't Pantera with Dimebag and with Vinnie Paul because they both passed away, but I saw them, and it was the same music, and it was funny because it didn't hit me the same way that I always had imagined because
Hmm.
I'm not angry, you know. So why do that with your voice? Because you want to and because you can, you know. Um and also like you could add filters to your voice, but it's not the same thing. It's not going to sound the same, right? Filters on your voice can add some kind of effect and stuff. Like Marilyn Manson does that a little bit. He adds some stuff, and some like industrial bands do that. Um, but for the most part, most of the singers that you hear that have a gritty voice or they scream, they're doing that. They're doing that with their voice, and I kind of liken it to, if you're a photographer, right? And you're taking a picture of something, you can mess with the coloring, you can mess with a whole like the lighting, all that stuff. But if you have a photo that that is lit well, that is framed well, um, you're not going to have to do that much in post to have a beautiful photo.
Totally.
So that's
Totally.
kind of like my opinion on that.
This episode is sponsored by ABS. Together, we are redefining what it means to be a musical community. Rather than a single central studio, our presence is woven into the fabric of our city. You'll find us in boutique practice rooms strategically placed at the heart of the action from Rock City Alston to across from the Symphony in Back Bay. We gather in local pubs, breweries, at local open mics, channeling our resources into getting singers out of the practice room and onto stages in the greater Boston area. I agree. And my answer to students when they ask me is quite similar to yours. One, it's athletic. And I think you and I are similar in that we started in classical music. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Oh yeah, I studied opera for 10 years.
Yeah. And so there's a joint athleticism, I think, between classical singing, opera singing,
Mhm.
and metal that really
There is
attracted
definitely
me.
like we are definitely cousins.
Yes.
You take like Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden. He's doing a lot of the big heavy vibrato like you would hear in opera, you know.
Yeah, and then the second point to your point is I always say it's like putting good icing on bad cake when
Mm-hmm.
you do things in post like that. You can put all the sugary icing on it that you want, but if the
Mm-hmm.
cake isn't good underneath, it's just not as good. But if you have good cake and good icing,
Mm-hmm.
that's a dessert you actually want.
Absolutely.
That makes it so much sweeter. So,
Mm-hmm.
there is my dessert analogy for the night.
Oh, it was a delicious analogy.
Thank you, thank you. So, what would you say to students who want to try this but are afraid of hurting their voice?
Well, I would say it's not really that different from hurting your voice singing anything, right?
Mm,
You can hurt your voice singing pop, you can hurt your voice singing folk, you can hurt your voice singing really anything.
yeah,
Um, so the same fundamentals apply, proper breath support, proper enunciation, proper pharyngeal control, register control, uh, all of that stuff has to be in order. In fact, I've had several people, I don't train metal vocals that often.
hmm,
You'd be surprised. Like I have a bunch of musical theater girls and um, I train all genres, but when people come to me specifically asking for that, I'm like, that can you teach me to scream? And I'm like, yes, but in 3 months I can.
right,
Because I am going to teach you all the fundamentals first. We're not just going to jump to that because you can hurt yourself.
yeah, totally.
Hmm.
And I don't have statistics on this. This is just my observations of looking at research and, going online and reading the literature and looking at who comes in for the research for speech therapy, because that's also a lens I look at. You know, I see a lot of classical singers in the literature actually, when it comes to voice rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that if you sing classical, you'll hurt your voice. Not saying that. It's not to say that they hurt their voice more than others, but it's to say that I see metal singers in the literature less, which I think is surprising, kind of, right? I think it's not surprising in that, like, they haven't been studied
Hmm.
as much, like, that part of the voice hasn't been studied. But at the same time, to sing that athletically, to, as you were saying, to get to that point 3 months later, you have to put in serious work first.
Hmm.
Like, you can't do that stuff healthily until you master the fundamentals. Whereas I think some kinds of other singing, you can kind of just go for it, and people do. And
Hmm.
then it's almost retroactive in the way they think about vocal health. Did that make sense? I was kind of going in a roundabout direction, but
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, um, there's been metal vocalists that have hurt themselves.
sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
The singer from M Shadows from Avenged Sevenfold totally blew out his voice in the album Waking the Fallen. Um
Mm,
at like in that era. And then which it was a lot of screaming, a lot of like false chord screaming and like that sort of thing. And then I guess he like had to start over and reinvented himself and came out with the City of Evil album and completely different, right? He sang melodic at that point and he sang, you know, completely different. And other singers like James LaBrie from Dream Theater, he's blown his voice out multiple times.
yeah.
He's really hurt himself. My observation on singers like that do hurt themselves. I've noticed that they don't understand the pharyngeal system very well,
Mm,
right? They're trying to belt from too low, right? When you're belting, when you're going for it, you push it up into your mask. You push it up high into the pharyngeal nasopharynx, um, and people who hurt themselves a lot, I notice that they're like trying to stay low as they're pushing. And what's happening, the larynx is like pushing down and they're pushing back up against it. and they're just creating all kinds of distortion and chaos in their vocal cords and really hurting themselves, you know?
Let's talk about this for a minute because you said something interesting before we even pressed record. So, for our listeners, I have just a sheet in front of me with general questions. And I said, are all of these okay to talk about? Anything that we should cover, you don't want to cover, we can just take this in a loose direction. And the question that you brought up as like something to star is how does vocal distortion work from a physiological standpoint? And you
Mm-hmm.
said, wait, I don't know that I really teach it like that. And I want to hear your thoughts on that further, and then I'll sort of expand on mine. But
If I'm able to explain to somebody the college explanation of that, it still isn't really going to it's not going to help them put rubber to road.
mm-hmm.
So I don't get into that too much, you know, when it comes to that. It's only on that real topic, right? Um, you know, I kind of teach more practical things.
Hmm.
That you know, I'm just kind of show them like simple ways. Like one thing that I do when it comes to teaching um grit is I teach speaking, right?
Right.
Because these noises that we're making when we're screaming and when we're singing with grit, we make when we talk, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
one thing, you know, like if you know you want to, I'm gonna back my mic up because I'll probably get loud and peak the
Sure.
but like if you're, you know, wanting to sing with grit, right? One fun exercise I tell my students is like, can you talk like a pirate, right? And they're like, you know, I'm like, "Arr, hey, ah," right? And then watch how easy that translates to singing. Yeah, right? It exactly translates from speech right into, you know, into singing. So, that's kind of the route I take with that. Now, I do teach anatomy here and there, you know. I mean, when it comes to breath support and stuff, I show people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
rib expansion, like the floating ribs expand, and the diaphragm contracts, and blah blah blah. I teach some of that, but I don't get into it too deep, just because, again, like they're not looking to teach it; they're looking to understand how to do it.
This episode is sponsored by Piano for the Vocalist. Piano for the Vocalist is your ultimate resource for unlocking the skills to self-accompany with confidence. This largely free program is focused on teaching singers to use collaborative piano techniques for vocal performance rather than traditional piano skills, empowering you to accompany yourself with ease. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear this because it has been a sticking point for me because I got into singing, yes, because I love singing. I mean, I think that's where most of us come from first. They hear the voices and they're like, "Whoa, how do I sound like that?"
Mm-hmm.
But I think I stuck with singing because I was nerdy about the pedagogy and anatomy. And when I brought teachers on to teach with me, um, a lot of them didn't come from that background. They
Mm-hmm.
came from performance backgrounds, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't. I came from a very anatomical and pedagogical background. I studied vocal disorders, and I came from a place of, well, if you're not understanding the physical, then it can't manifest in the ways you want to. And they sort of were resistant to that idea. And I think what I landed on, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, is we need both. We need, in my opinion, we need the understanding of the physical anatomy, and we also need the just do it, just try it. And what I think is wonderful about working with my team is that when I can't provide that, they can. And
Mm-hmm.
when they have a question about the other side of it, I get a slack. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's really wonderful.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, you and I met when we did the vocals professional course at Berkeley.
Yes.
Before that, I had absolutely zero pedagogy.
Mhm.
Absolutely zero. I was taught by uh when I started learning from him, he was 89, an opera maestro, taught a bunch of people, had a really good big life in opera. I wasn't even that interested in singing opera actually. I just went because I had this idea like if you want to get good at an instrument, learn the classics, right? So I wanted to learn opera for that reason. And so I went to him and this man never ever taught anything like we sat down, we did exercises
Mm,
and if I wasn't placing in my mask properly, he wouldn't say anything. He would just demonstrate what he wanted me to sound like.
was
Right?
that effective?
It was very,
Okay.
very. In fact, all of his students, like the students that, like he wouldn't teach everybody. He actually had auditions for singing,
Mm,
but all of his students are amazing. Like I'm still friends with some of them, because
right.
he lived to 101, then he passed. He passed like during COVID. And but there he's produced some amazing vocalists. So it is effective, it does work. But I didn't like as a teacher because I was teaching too. I just basically taught the way that he taught. And during COVID, we had some time to go to school. So I
Hmm.
was like, okay, we've got a lot of downtime. I'm going to go to school and I'm going to learn how to, I'm going to learn the pedagogy aspect of things. And so I'm kind of from both worlds, right? I'm from that old school world where you just show it and, who cares about anatomy? And I know a fair bit about the anatomy. And
Right.
probably nowhere near as much as you cuz that's like your thing. But I totally agree with you though. Your team is like perfect cuz you got the pedagogy and their performance. And I've kind of got that with myself
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah. Well, it starts with yourself, I think. And then hopefully your team is a good mirror of those values that
Mhm.
you have worked so hard to instill through your
Mhm.
own journey. But I will say that I'm grateful to have found those people, and
Mhm.
I feel like I get taught through that.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm grateful for that.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, I would ask you, what didn't I cover about metal before I move on from this?
It's just an extremely passionate genre. Um I think it's for the I mean there's definitely exceptions, but for the most part the musicians in metal are really learned. They really know their stuff. I mean, to rip on a guitar, you got to spend years and years and years and years
Mm.
practicing. To sing, the styles you have to, you know, people hear like even people who scream, like I don't do that much of it. I sing like I said, more like operatically and whatnot. But um back in the day, before I started singing, before I met my opera maestro and everything, I even did like hardcore, screaming,
Right.
like the real false chord screaming, that sort of thing. And, you hear people comment, they're like, "Oh, anybody can just scream." I'm like, "Let me hear you.
Yeah.
Let me hear you. Let me like even the guys who scream, like they had to, even if nobody taught them and they just taught themselves, they had to go through the ringer. They probably burned their voice out 50 different times and finally figure out how not to, you know?
Right.
And just listening to their favorite inspiration and trying to imitate it.
It is interesting. A lot of the vocal artists that I talk to who sing metal have a similar story in that they'll say like I kind of like did something to my voice and then I figured out that I had to figure it out and
Mhm.
got serious about um how to develop my technique. But a lot
Mm.
of them start with that story, and I find it super interesting because it's not like something that's taught in schools, at least that I've seen. Even when I was trying to hire for a metal teacher, I was like, I don't, usually I would just go on like Berkeley or Longy or New England Conservatory, like job boards, and I'd have honestly like hundreds of applications within a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And I would put up like rasp and distortion teacher, and it would be like two.
Mm-hmm. Metal is not it's not big like classical music or pop or, you know, it's definitely a niche. You know, it's pretty big, like it's getting big. It's
Mm.
definitely making some splashes here and there, but you know, compared to pop, it's kind of a small genre, you know.
Do you think that it's not big or it's just not taught academically?
Um, well, I think both.
Okay.
I think both. I mean, the thing about the metal world I've learned is that like everybody knows everybody, you know, anybody that performs like, you know, it's a small world. Like, you know, there's a handful of bands that like really made it, and then there's like the bands that kind of made it, you know, made it pretty decent but not like Metallica big, you know. And I find that everybody knows somebody from a band, and you know, it's a and that's the other thing about metal. It's a community. You asked like,
Mm,
you know, it's a community. Like these are people that, you know, care very much about, you know, each other, you know.
right.
They look out for each other. Even if you go to a metal concert and let's say somebody gets hurt in the mosh pit, um guess what happens? They immediately pick them up.
When you said that, I was like, wow, that had such a big impact. Like,
Mhm.
you wouldn't think of like a mosh pit stopping to like pick
It
someone
does.
up, but
Literally does.
that
Yeah.
is really indicative.
Mhm. It's a bunch of passionate people that they need a community, they need a brotherhood or a sisterhood, and they need friends, and it's a really great way to have that, you know.
It's funny that you say that because I went on Fiverr. We never released this, but we were going to release a like distortion quick tip page
Mhm.
through our studio, and it didn't come to fruition for whatever reason, a bunch of
Mhm.
reasons, right?
Mhm.
But I went on Fiverr and I just was trying to find like you can get artists who are just looking to do voiceovers or give voice samples. So I went on to have another person besides from Quinn do these vocal distortions because I wanted more than one people to hear more than one voice while they were learning.
Mhm.
And someone messaged me back on Fiverr, and I know two or three people who are really into this genre specifically. So I said, these were my inspirations from starting this page. This is kind of the sounds we're looking for. I even sent them like YouTube links to music they had up already. And I was like, we're looking for this kind of false fold sound because within that world, that can mean even different things to different people. And he was like, oh, yeah, I know all of them. I know all those people. He was in South America. And I was
Mhm.
like, what do you mean you know these people? Like, one of them was in New York, one of them was in Boston, one of them was in South America. They're like, yeah, we know each other from, gigs or
Yeah.
traveling or I was like,
Yup.
oh, you know.
You know, they have these big festivals, these big metal festivals, and so many of the same bands get together in these festivals. It's like the European circuit and the United States circuit. Yeah, all the bands know each other. They share touring managers, they share merch people.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the merch people are in bands. Like, I mean, my friend Dylan. I don't know if you ever heard of Sleep Token, but they've made it pretty big. And my friend Dylan, he's the merch guy for Sleep Token, but he's also in this band called Weeping Wound. And yeah, I mean, it's a really tight knit world for sure.
It's so cool.
Mhm.
Johnny, I always end our podcast with the same couple of questions, but the first one is if you had one piece of practical advice that you haven't given yet, but you would leave our listeners with, what would it be?
I think for vocalists in general, I think working on vocal calisthenics is super important. I think I think if you really want to grow as a vocalist, work on warm-ups. You know, even if you don't want a teacher and you can be self-aware enough and really like carefully train yourself, which some people can do, you need warm-ups, because
Yes.
warm-ups are, it's like I use this analogy a lot. I compare it to sports.
Hmm.
If you're in a basketball team and you want to go to basketball practice, when you go there, you don't play a game of basketball. You work on all the individual elements of the game. So if you compare it to singing, like a song is the basketball game, right? But, warm-ups are the individual elements of the song, right? The
Hmm.
scales, the pitch, the enunciation, the pharyngeal placement, all these things you can work on individually just by doing vocal warm-ups. So that's my recommendation to anybody looking to sing. Yeah. One piece of advice or what have you.
The best compliment I ever got as a teacher was one of my students said, "You made me a warm up man."
Mm.
And I said, then I did my job, you
Yeah,
know?
I tell my students, I'm like, learn to love these exercises.
Yeah.
When you perform them like you're at Carnegie Hall and you're performing them in front of, 3,000 people. Like, the more serious you take them, the better vocalist you're going to be.
Yes.
100%.
And the healthier you'll be too.
Yep.
The second question I like to end with is, where can we find your stuff? Your music? How do we get in contact with you if someone has metal questions or music questions?
Yeah, so my website is a great place to start, stellarvocals.com. It's STELLAR vocals.com. As far as my music goes, you want to hear my singing, my band, The Morning. By the way, it's not the time of day, it's the sad kind.
Okay.
MOURNING. You can find us. I mean, we've got a bunch of music videos up on YouTube. We have an album that we released about a year ago on Spotify and all the different streaming platforms. We're on Bandcamp. We also have a website, themorningmusic.com. So we are easily found.
Excellent. And if you don't mind, I'm going to end on a plug for the studio. As speaking of community, just got our exclusive hats in for a community music video that one of our students is running at a local gym. So I
Mm,
highly recommend, if you're in the Boston area and you want to come sing with us, check out Jody Shy's music and come join us for a great community event. We love to build these kinds of communities, whether they're on the podcast or not on the podcast in the Boston area. But full circle moment, thank you so much, Johnny, for joining us on the podcast today.
yeah, my
One,
pleasure.
it was just so great to talk pedagogy and music with you again. And two, I know that our listeners will benefit from what you had to say.
Awesome. I'm so happy to hear that.